Hey guys, gonna get started here in just 1 second. Give us a nice big font here. Alright, we got some viewers. Yeah, we have 6 people watching. Good enough. You guys put into the chat that you can hear me okay, and as soon as I hear that, we'll get underway here. Alright, let's get started. Good afternoon, I am Sensei Kevlar. Tonight I'm going to be talking to you about encryption, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of break it down from a layman's perspective and figure out what it is that it's useful for and how it really does work. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to break it into its most primitive functions. And the way these things always seem to start is with a story between 2 people, Alice and Bob. And Alice wants to send a message to Bob. And there's a problem, which is that there's a person in the middle, and we're going to call them Eve. And Alice wants to be able to send a message securely to Bob, but she doesn't want Eve to be able to see or be able to read the message. Okay, so the way that we can solve this is by using encryption. And what encryption is a set of math rules that allow us to do the following things. If we have a plain text, a message, just the message that we want to send, this is the message that Alice wants to send to Bob, and we plug it into encryption, what this does, the guarantee that we're getting out of this, is that this will give us ciphertext. Okay, and the whole point of ciphertext is given ciphertext without plugging that into decryption, we can't find plain text. Okay, so the really key understanding here is that if you have ciphertext and you want plain text, you can't get there without decryption, right? There's no way to look at the ciphertext and figure out what the plain text was. So the way that we can exploit this, the way we can utilize this opportunity here, is if Alice and Bob share an encryption and decryption scheme that Eve doesn't know about or can't figure out, and this is sort of where the real problem starts to come in, then what we can do is if Alice has a message she wants to send to Bob, she can write that message out and then run it through encryption, and that will result in ciphertext. And then she can send ciphertext, so Alice sends ciphertext to Bob, and then Bob, so first Alice encrypts plain text resulting in ciphertext. And then Alice sends ciphertext to Bob, and Bob decrypts ciphertext, revealing plain text. Okay. The point is that if Eve were to intercept the ciphertext that Alice is sending to Bob, and Eve does not have this decryption process right here, then she can't figure out what the message is. And this allows us to be secure. Of course, and just about every, simple scheme that we might use to encrypt or decrypt our language, our things, can be pretty trivially broken. So, for example, like, let's say we use the old ROT13, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. And what we're going to do is we're going to shift all of the letters by 13. So we're going to take the second half of the alphabet, and we're going to line it up with the first half of the alphabet. We're going to take the first half of the alphabet, we're going to line it up with our second half of the alphabet. This is a substitution cipher. This is an example of encryption and decryption, where we're saying, if our message is, hello, then what we would do is when we encounter an H, instead we use a U. And when we encounter an E, instead we use an R. And when we encounter an L, instead we use a Y, and a Y, and a B. And so this ends up being our ciphertext. And initially, when you sort of look at ciphertext, it's not really obvious that anybody could ever figure out that this really meant hello. But with a little bit of analysis and a little bit of, work, we could probably come up with a scheme that might decrypt this simply by plugging it in reverse. We take the U, and we look at the U, and we look up here, and we see that the first letter is H, and now we can decrypt this message in exactly the same way. So this isn't a very secure encryption and decryption method. What we really need is we really need a method that Eve doesn't know about, or alternatively, we need to sort of increase the way that we are doing this, and this becomes a little bit more of a challenge. So here's what this looks like. The way that we increase our, let me just compact this really quick. The way that we increase our, let's increase our text space here. This gets a little bit wordy: plain text encryption, ciphertext, ciphertext decryption, plain text. Ciphertext is not equal to plain text, but what I'm really saying is I'm really saying that decryption acting upon encryption, the results of encryption, rather, acting upon plain text is equal to plain text. Okay, what I'm saying here is when you take encryption in plain, encryption on plain text, and you feed that into decryption, what you get is plain text. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify this notation for us here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say P is our plain text, and well, let's just write it, right? D on E on P is equal to P. Okay, encryption on plain text, decryption on that gives us back plain text. We can write the rest of this the same way. E on P is equal to C. D on C is equal to P. Okay, this is this right here. I can now get rid of this. We now have our notation. What I want to do now is I want to make it so this and this are harder for Eve to deal with. One of the ways that we can do this is we can do something like use a more sophisticated form of encryption and decryption, which includes a key. So let's say our key was, again, hello, and what we're going to do is we're going to increase the way that our encryption and decryption works to include the functioning in of this key, right? So we're going to say encryption with this key on plain text is equal to ciphertext for that key, and decryption on given that key on ciphertext for that key gives us back our original plain text. So once again, modifying our formula down here, what we end up with is this idea that this encryption can be shared and this decryption can be shared, and Eve can know the decryption and encryption algorithm, but if she does not know the key that was used to encrypt the plain text with, she cannot decrypt it and she cannot decrypt it and get the plain text back. So what this means is that now Alice can use this to encrypt her plain text with a key that Bob also knows, and then Bob can use that key to decrypt it and reveal the plain text that Alice sent. And even if Eve receives the ciphertext as it gets transmitted in between messengers here, she can't decrypt it without the key. Now, the obvious problem here is that Alice and Bob already need to have a secure channel for communicating the key. And if you already have a secure channel for communicating the key, well, why didn't you just use that secure channel to communicate to begin with? And why do you need all of this crazy crap, right? So, what we need is to further enhance our scheme in order to bring in more utility, because right now this isn't very useful. This is only useful if we already have a secret channel between Alice and Bob that excludes Eve. And if we already have a secret channel between Alice and Bob that excludes Eve, we don't need this. We can just have Alice and Bob talk and Eve can't hear us. The only time that we need this is when Eve can hear us, and now we still need a secret channel to exchange our key. No good. What we need is a way to be able to exchange our keys even in such a way that Alice and Bob can communicate, and even if Eve gets the keys involved in the exchange over the channel of communication here, she still can't read the message. So here is how we modify our algorithm. Instead of having just one key, I forgot to label this as our key, right? Instead of having just one key, we're going to set up a way that Alice can send Bob a message, and here's how it's going to work. We're going to have Bob generate a pair of keys, and Bob is going to do, these keys are going to be tied together in such a way that if we have a locking key, and we'll just get, say we generate a locking key and a paired unlocking key. Okay. Now, what happens here in this new thing is that if you were to encrypt a message with the locking key, it could not be decrypted with the locking key. The only key that could be used to decrypt it, the only key that can be used to decrypt something keyed to the locking key is that paired unlocking key. Okay. So Bob generates both of these, and he knows both of these privately, and he's not going to tell anyone any of these, right? Except he needs to tell Alice one of these. He tells her the locking key. He sends this over the wire, and maybe Eve gets the locking key. Now, what happens is Alice can send a message using our locking key encryption, our encryption for this locking key on her message that she wants to send to Bob, and that will generate in plain text, which can be only unlocked with her paired unlocking key. Okay, so we take that ciphertext, we send it over the wire, and then Bob, who happens to have his paired unlocking key, because he did not send this over the wire, is able to decrypt this, and now we have our new formula. So, running through this again, we have of the locking key on the paired unlocking key, Bob generates a set of keys, a locking key and a paired unlocking key. These keys are tied together. You can think of them as two keys on a key ring, except one key will lock the door and one key will unlock the door. And one key, the other key won't do the other key's function. So he sends the locking key to Alice. Alice uses the locking key to create the encrypted message. Maybe Eve gets the locking key in the process. Maybe she also gets the ciphertext for the paired unlocking key. What she does not have at this point is the paired unlocking key, because Bob never sent that over the wire. He only sent the locking key, and he kept the paired unlocking key on his computer secret to himself. Okay? Then, Bob received the message from Alice. He used his paired unlocking key to decrypt the message, and he read the message that Alice had sent him. Everything that Bob and Alice have exchanged up until this point, Eve has gotten a hold of, and Eve still can't read the message at the end of the exchange, right here. Okay? Why? Because Alice encrypts the plaintext, resulting in ciphertext, sends that ciphertext to Bob, and only Bob is able to decrypt that ciphertext, revealing the plaintext, because only Bob's in possession of that paired unlocking key. Now, let's say that we wanted to set up a two-way channel between Alice and Bob. Well, this is easy, right? We have Alice's paired locking key and Alice's paired unlocking key, and we have Bob's locking key, and we have Bob's paired unlocking key. This starts when Bob generates his set of keys and Alice generates her set of keys. Alice sends her locking key to Bob, and Bob sends his locking key to Alice. When Alice wants to send a message to Bob, she first locks it with Bob's locking key. This results in ciphertext, which she sends over to Bob. Bob is able to read this message by unlocking it with Bob's paired locking key. When Bob wants to reply, he writes out his reply, and he locks it with Alice's locking key, which Alice sent to him. Bob sent her Bob's locking key. He locks it with Alice's locking key. Alice then receives the encrypted message from Bob. Alice unlocks it with her unlocking key. At no point did Alice reveal her unlocking key. At no point did Bob reveal his unlocking key. All of the messages went over the public wire. All of the messages were exposed to Eve, and at no point could Eve read any of the messages. So, we can use this to further do cool things, right? Let's say that previously Bob has made what we would call a signature, and he has exchanged the signature with Alice. In previous messages, Alice has made transactions with Bob, and he has signed his message in a certain way. We'll call it his signature. It's very distinctive to Bob, and only Bob knows his signature, and he never reveals his signature to Alice because he only puts it into messages. And Alice knows Bob by his signature. When Bob signs his message, she knows his handwriting. She knows his unique flair, okay? Now, let's say that Eve were to somehow get a hold of Bob's locking key, because we gave him one. It could have happened. In our original exchange, we exchanged locking keys. The problem is now that Eve is able to generate a message and send it to Alice using Bob's locking key, and it might look like it came from Bob. We might be fooled into thinking this is Bob talking to us, when really it's Eve, who we have given Bob's locking key to this point, sending us a message. Now, Eve can't read the reply, but sometimes this is enough. Think about, if the message is, go ahead and sell all my shares. Bob says to Alice, go ahead and sell all of my BitConnect token. And Eve receives the message, and it's encrypted with Bob's locking key. Well, how can Alice be sure that Bob really did send this message? Okay, well, again, we can bring in this paradigm. What we can do is Bob's signature is unique to Bob, and he always uses the same signature. Eve doesn't know Bob's signature because she's never received a message, you've never been able to decrypt a message that Bob has had his signature in that he sent to Alice, because he doesn't have Alice's paired unlocking key, and Bob only encrypts messages and sends them to Alice and signs them with his signature using Alice's paired locking key, which requires her paired unlocking key to unlock. Now, as a result, Eve would basically have to guess at what Bob's signature looks like. So long as Bob maintains his signature and always uses the same signature every time he signs his messages, he can ensure that Alice will always know when Eve tries to send him a message. Why? Because it wasn't signed correctly. It wasn't signed using Bob's signature. If Eve receives a message and it says, sell all my BitConnect tokens, I'm Bob, but that's not Bob's signature, then Alice should not execute this message. Okay? How we can achieve this is by mixing up these things again. Okay? What's interesting about, we're just going to focus on one set of keys for just 1 minute. We have the locking key and we have the unlocking key. Okay? What's interesting about these things is that while a message that is locked with this key has to be unlocked with this key, the vice versa is also true, which is to say that if you lock a message with the unlocking key, the only key that can unlock that message would be the locking key. Okay? That's why we call these keys, this is really our public key. The one we're going to share around is the key that we give people to lock up our messages with. And we call the one that we hang on to our private key. Okay? These are still the same roles. There's still the locking key and the unlocking key. It's just that we realize that they actually can play either role. Okay? Their real role is to be publicly broadcasted for everyone to see and privately stored for only Bob and Alice to hold on to their own of, so they can send messages to each other by using their public keys and unencrypting them using their private keys. So if Bob wants to send a message to Alice, what he can do is he can encrypt the message using his. So first what he does is he encrypts the message using Alice's, or no, let's start over. He encrypts his message first using his private key. He then encrypts this using Alice's public key. Well, when Alice receives the message, she unlocks it with her private key, but she now has an encrypted message. Well, what's the only key that can unlock a message with Bob's private key, which nobody but Bob knows? It's Bob's public key, and she knows Bob's public key, and now we've achieved signature. Now we've achieved a way of saying that the only person who could have possibly wrote this message is the person who has ownership of his private key. Okay? This is critical. And this is how Bitcoin and blockchains and all of these ledgers of account work. When we talk about sending to someone, we ask you to send them their public key. And what this does is this creates a message which can only be unlocked by somebody's private key. Your private key is stored in your wallet. I tell you to back it up on paper. I tell you to put it in your safe. Why? Because these things can be generated one of two ways. One way is to roll the dice and then figure out the correlation between them. The other way is to use a deterministic key, which can generate the roll of the dice, which you then can correlate all of these between. Now, This is the point of all of this. All of this mechanism right here, public key encryption, powers a lot of our entire infrastructure. When you go and you get a little locking symbol in the upper left-hand corner next to your address when you go to Google or any website, and it turns green and a little lock symbol appears, what has happened is both computers behind the scene have exchanged they've exchanged public keys, and they are now communicating messages back and forth by encrypting them and sending them back and forth to each other. And this is how SSL works, so that if anybody were to intercept your messages as you type your password into the website, they can't receive them because they don't know the private key of the web server, and I'm going to encrypt it with the web server's public key before sending my password to you. Now, this is the same way that Bitcoin works, where this is the same way that any, ledger of account works, where you have a public key, and this generates a message that is basically locked by and cannot be unlocked except for anything but your private key, which you must store safely. The minute that you lose control of your private keys, the minute that these private keys become leaked in any way, or the minute that this mechanism becomes suspect or unstable or, able to be hacked in any way, all of the infrastructure falls apart. Okay? So if you are in any way implementing or working in these systems, it is critical that you understand that the experts have spent lots and lots and lots and lots of time figuring out how to make crypto correct and not breakable, or at least not breakable given our current systems. Now, that doesn't mean that it will always be unbreakable, but to give you an idea of the type of number space that we're working with, for the number of bits in your public key for Bitcoin, there are more atoms in the universe than there are less atoms in the universe than there are bits in the bit space in the public key. Possible combinations for you to generate a collision, it's called, where you get the same roll of the dice as somebody else. This is like, you saying, I'm going to pick an atom in the universe at random, and somebody else saying, I'm going to pick an atom in the universe at random, and you guys picking the same atom in the universe. And if you think about the number of atoms in the universe, there's more of them. There's more public keys out there for Bitcoin. And that's why we can do cool things. Like if we want to generate a new address, we can literally just roll the dice. And this gives us the seed we need to figure out the correlation between this point in our key space and get our public and private key from it. So that's how new addresses are generated, right? For the old style wallets, is you literally just get some randomness, generate up a private key, derive the public key from it, and we're off to the races. And so this is why ledgers of account can be completely anonymous, completely decentralized. They can offer us utility and security using the laws of math instead of the old traditional systems, which rely on trust of people, trust of centralized systems, trust of banks, trust of executives, trust of all of the other underlying systems. We can actually derive all of our economy off of the laws of math. And I think that's how it should be personally, because ultimately, having an economy and having a currency and having all of these things, well, it really just is all about math. That's all there really is to it. So dealing with these numbers, using numbers, to me makes sense. It makes a certain sense that we can keep the ideas pure, we can keep the math pure, and we can build new systems using these old systems, which eventually allow us to be free of the mistakes that we have made in the past that are sort of keeping us down. And I really do invite you to think more about the opportunities created when we leverage systems like this, because in the beginning it was just SSL, and now it's blockchains, and now as we take encryption to the next levels, there's even more opportunities out there. And Lots of opportunities for services, lots of opportunities for improving lives, and lots of opportunities for hurting people too. I don't want you to be disillusioned that this has not been used to abuse. The fact of the matter is that there's a reason why these things get, names like Ponzi scams and all that kind of stuff, and it's not a good one, and it's not a clean space. And I do apologize on behalf of all people in the crypto space for the bad things that people ultimately do with money. However, I think there is an opportunity here, and the opportunity is one to learn and to grow in this space and to be a part of something that is much, much bigger than where we have been before. I hope that was informative, and I thank you for your time.